Another edition of Beat the Closing Number, presented by TheLines.com and Bet365 Sportsbook. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined as always by Brett Gibbons. You can follow him on X at Road to CFB. And Adam Rittenberg, national college football writer for ESPN. Adam, I would say where our lovely listeners and viewers can follow you, but you were hacked either earlier this week or sometime recently.
Yeah, it was a few weeks ago. It's an interesting experience. It happened to me back in 2022 as well. That one got resolved a little faster. Fewer people working at Twitter these days, but yeah, it's an interesting experience from obviously being on there quite a bit to having to monitor it more from afar. But yeah, in some ways it's allowed me to focus a little bit more on other things. So it's not ideal. Don't recommend it, but as I always say, none of us got into journalism to be posting on an app that we don't even work for. So
you could make a burner account to kind of monitor things from afar.
Yeah, no, I have other accounts. Obviously, you got to monitor things to a degree. But I actually have my old DePaul journalism professor account that I still use a little bit, not to post, but just to kind of track things.
Right.
So yeah, always need a backup.
Fair enough. And we'll get into the 12-team college football playoff and the 4 games ahead this coming weekend, starting with Indiana Notre Dame on Friday. Adam will be in South Bend covering it for ESPN in the first ever college football playoff game in a 12-team playoff format. Brett, you'll be watching a college football game, but not any of these 4 this weekend.
No, I will be in Alliance at Mount Union. That's a D3 semifinal, the last home games before they head to Houston to play in the Stag Bowl for the national title. Hope to see the Raiders return to their glory and maybe pursue yet another national championship. Kind of a powerhouse there in North Central Ohio.
Any bets for the listeners of yours before we get started?
For D3?
Correct.
I don't know that I've seen any lines posted. I did take it's up above 3 now, but I did take South Dakota State minus 130 over North Dakota State this weekend in the FCS though.
All right, I respect it. Brett always brings us his FCS takes here on Beat the Closing Number. But as always, the odds we discuss on the show presented by Bet365 Sportsbook. Kicking things off with number 10, Indiana, in terms of the college football playoff seeding at number 7, Notre Dame. Notre Dame down from -8, -8.5 to -7, a flat -7 at Bet365, total of 52. Adam, not to continue to tease our listeners and viewers, but before we get into the matchup, from the programs you've spoken with, what's the perception around the first ever 12-team college football playoff?
Well, I think there's a lot of excitement, Eli. The fact that teams can get into this thing without having to win their conference or run the table or be really, really close to perfect. And we were debating a number of 9-3 teams going into the selections coming out of the SEC. So I think there's increased opportunity. There's different pathways to it. I think there's a lot of excitement around the campus sites. I know I'm excited about it, but it's also challenging. I mean, Notre Dame has finals this week, and that never used to be an issue in terms of having a game that would conflict with final exams. And there's a number of schools that would intentionally not accept bowl invitations coming out of this week. So, it's different. Notre Dame doesn't play football on Fridays. They don't play football on campus at this time of year. So there's going to be some logistical and environmental challenges that these schools and teams are going to be facing. But overall, I think there's tremendous excitement that this opportunity exists. And the idea here was to be more inclusive and to have a truly nationally representative playoff. And I think you have that. In Oregon being number 1, a team from the West Coast, even though they're playing in a league like the Big Ten, which is mostly in the Midwest. But you also have Arizona State that's part of this playoff, Boise State, kind of from that mountain time zone that's part of the playoff. But then you also have Texas that's there, and Penn State, Ohio State. So there's a lot of big brands, but there's also some less familiar brands. SMU is the second team coming out of the state of Texas, not Texas A&M or Baylor or Texas Tech or TCU, but an SMU program that was really an afterthought 7 or 8 years ago and has really risen up the ranks now and was the ACC runner-up. So I think it's a really exciting time.
Looking at this matchup in particular, Brett, you're the lone soldier on Notre Dame here. So explain your handicap.
Yeah, when you talk about the on-campus sites, I really do think that the home field advantage is going to matter, even though I've heard a lot of watering down rumors about it being a nationally hosted event by the CFP and not really Notre Dame itself. But I don't know how much the CFP is really going to be able to step on the prestige of Notre Dame there at home. But, hey, no doubt about it, Indiana's going to be well represented at this. This is not a tough drive from Bloomington to South Bend, and this is the most relevant Indiana's probably ever been in their entire history. So my handicap here is just pretty simple. I've seen Indiana once against top-flight competition. They lost 38-15, and honestly, 8 of those points came in garbage time. It was really like 31-7 against Ohio State. Notre Dame physically and talent-wise, they're a lot closer to Ohio State than anybody else that Indiana's played this year. Notre Dame number 1 in point margin this year. Indiana, of course, third. I'd be doing them a disservice not to mention that. But look, I think Notre Dame's offense is going to be able to score in Indiana. They put up 31 on a pretty good Louisville defense, 49, of course, against Army. I know that's a little tough when you're talking about talent comparison between Army and Notre Dame, or Indiana, pardon me. But, I've said it a few times on this pod this year. This is just a different Notre Dame team than I've seen in years past. They're banged up with big-time names. Benjamin Moore's an All-American. He's not playing. Jordan Bethello, probably their best pass rusher. He's not playing. 2 preseason starting offensive linemen. They're not playing. And it really hasn't made that much of a difference. They're still rolling everybody on their schedule. So I haven't seen Indiana play from behind very much this season. That's a testament to them controlling the game. I think they're 6th in ESPN's game control metric there. But what happens if they get down early? Is it going to cascade like Ohio State? That's why I'm taking Notre Dame -7 here.
Adam, you and I were texting about this game before we got started. I asked you, was there a money line underdog you liked? And I think we're all in agreement that all of our picks, for the most part, are going to be chalky here in the first round of the college football playoff. But I think between you and I, we like Indiana to at least cover, if not win the game outright. Now, maybe a smaller bet, or for you, not at all a bet covering the matchup. But what's your perception of the point spread going into South Bend?
Yeah, so I do bowl picks. If you guys aren't aware, I do bowl picks the day that they all come out. So it's kind of an absurd exercise that we do every year, but a lot of people read it, so that's why we'll keep doing it. Because obviously opt-outs and there's all sorts of things that happen before the actual game. So I had Notre Dame by 10, but again, I can absolutely see Indiana keeping this close or winning the game. I mean, one area of Indiana's team that I don't think gets nearly enough attention nationally is the fact that they lead the nation in rushing defense by a wide margin. They've been by far the nation's best defense against the run. And what does Notre Dame do well? They run the ball, and they run the ball with 2 backs and a quarterback who are all averaging over 5 yards a carry. So, as defensive coordinator Brian Haynes said this week, we can't stop their run, but when Riley Leonard decides to take off, we can make him feel it. We can make him pay, so to speak. And so they're trying to be really physical and maybe make Notre Dame think twice about how often it wants to run its quarterback in a game like this. But for them to win, they're going to have to contain that run game. They're going to have to avoid those special teams breakdowns, and then they're going to have to play better offensive line-wise than they did in the second half against Michigan when they really couldn't do anything, or for most of the game against Ohio State. And you mentioned it, Brett, the injuries that Notre Dame's had, and in talking to defensive coordinator Al Golden, he said he's never seen anything like this, where they've had these key injuries, and yet they have not fallen back at all as a unit. So a lot of guys have stepped up at different levels of the defense, especially up front and in the back end. Losing a guy like Morrison, who's a potential first-round draft pick, All-America type player, they have not fallen off there. No one's really made them pay for losing those types of players, and then getting a guy like Howard Cross, the third back, in the lineup this week for the first time in about 6 weeks since he played is going to be a big boost for Notre Dame. So again, if we see what we saw from Indiana against the 2, at least personnel-wise, elite teams that they saw, it could be a tough night for them. But if they can hold up at the line of scrimmage, I think they're absolutely going to be in this game.
I'm with you. And like you said, you had Notre Dame by 10 in your initial pool when the college football playoff and the bowl games were initially announced, going back to a couple weeks ago after championship weekend. But for me, the handicap with my bet on Indiana plus 7.5, the line down, as I mentioned, to IU plus 7 -105 at Bet365. They rank atop college football FBS in stuff rate and adjusted line yards allowed against a Notre Dame team that wants to run the ball. So to the point that you brought up, Brett, While Indiana in a negative game state hasn't performed well, negative variance went their way or went against them in Columbus, but we also haven't seen Notre Dame play with a negative game script per se. And Leonard the explosive passing game isn't necessarily there for Notre Dame as it is for Indiana in Curtis Rourke, completing over 52% of his passes more than 10 yards downfield. Those aren't necessarily quote-unquote true explosive passing plays, but I would say Indiana has a more explosive passing attack than Notre Dame, at least in terms of efficiency. Would you agree, Brett?
Sure, but just really quick on the stuff rate. Can we do a little exercise? What's the best offensive line they played? Ohio State?
Yeah.
Missing 3 starters. Michigan, who couldn't run the ball against anybody with a pulse. I mean, what are we talking? UCLA, Maryland, Northwestern, Nebraska down a few starters, Washington, Michigan State. I mean, Purdue? Charlotte? Is this opponent I don't think this is an opponent adjusted number. That's why I'm all over Notre Dame here.
Okay, fair enough. I could counter that by saying Notre Dame strength of schedule if you want to, toy with Indiana. Strength of schedule for Notre Dame 60th. Strength of schedule in college football. Just saying is all I'm saying. Either way, If we want to look ahead, hypothetical lines at Bet365 for the quarterfinal. Notre Dame would be favored, slight favorite, -1.5 on the look-ahead lines at Bet365 against Georgia. And conversely, Georgia -6.5 in a hypothetical look-ahead matchup against Indiana. And again, those odds courtesy of Bet365 Sportsbook. Also, one last note here. For anybody listening or watching that likes Indiana, this courtesy of Chris Felica, former teammate of Adam Rittenberg's at ESPN. Over the last 3 years, 59 dogs have covered in 122 bowl game matchups in the college football playoff game. So that under 50% in terms of the hit rate, but 42 of those 59 winners among underdogs won the game outright. So typically, in terms of the cover rate, or if underdogs are covering over the last few years, they have a pretty strong chance to win the game outright. We'll see if that's the case for Indiana. Either way, I like the Hoosiers at the key number of 7.5, depending on where you can get it. Over to the second college football first-round matchup here, Adam. Number 6, Penn State, an 8.5-point home favorite against number 11, aforementioned SMU in terms of the seeding. Total of 54. SMU snuck into the college football playoff, quote-unquote snuck into the CFP ahead of Alabama after falling to Clemson in the ACC championship game. So, two-parter here for you, Adam. The odds indicated that SMU was going to get in over Alabama. The market said, I think, around an 80% implied probability in that regard. Were you surprised at all? And what kind of chance, if anything, do you give the Mustangs to go into Happy Valley and compete with the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised they made it in. I don't think you expand a playoff to leave a team like this out that won all of its regular season games in a new conference and did not have a bad loss on its resume. They only lost to BYU at home early season game with a different quarterback. So I think it defeats the purpose of expanding, especially to diversify. You don't expand just to get more SEC teams in or Big Ten teams in. That's going to happen naturally, but you expand to diversify the field. And I think they did that with this SMU team. This SMU team's really good, guys. They won 2 different leagues the last 2 years with largely the same group of players. And that's one thing that Rhett Lashley has made a point of saying is that, hey, we're a veteran team. We know how to win. We're not going to be intimidated, and we'll see if they are. This is a big stage, a new stage for teams like Indiana, and certainly for a team like SMU, is not playing in venues like Beaver Stadium, and certainly not in a situation like the College Football Playoff last season. So how do they handle that environment? It's going to be really interesting to see. But with the veteran experience and a really good coaching staff led by Rhett Lashley, I think they also have an opportunity in this game. I will say this, though. I really liked what I saw from Penn State, guys, in the Big Ten championship game, even in defeat. I think you can say, if you didn't watch that game, oh, here's another big game lost by James Franklin. It's what they do. But if you study that game closely, and I was there for it in Indianapolis, they really pushed Oregon. After a rough start, they matched Oregon score for score, and I didn't think they could do that because I thought they had a clear deficiency at wide receiver versus all the different ways that Oregon could attack them. And it wasn't like Dylan Gabriel played poorly. He played really well in that game. And obviously Tez Johnson was unbelievable. He was the MVP of the game. But Penn State was right there, and they were doing things with beyond just Tyler Warren. So I came away from that saying, okay, this is a team, especially with the pathway that they have in the playoff, to make a run. And I think they have that opportunity to do that with the way that Drew Aller's playing at quarterback, with the running backs performing at a high level, getting a little bit more from the wide receiver position, which again is not where it needs to be. But they got something from those guys in the Big Ten championship, and they're talented on defense. Did they play well against Oregon? No. Did they have some breakdowns? Yes. But Abdul Carter and some of those other guys in the back end, there's a lot of talent for that unit led by Tom Allen. So I have Penn State winning this one by 11. Going a little bit over the total, but certainly could be a little bit tighter than that as well, especially if Penn State turns the ball over.
I love it. Brett, any take for you on the point spread or total here?
Yeah, Adam brings up a really good point about where SMU's played this year. I mean, you look at it, their probably best environment that they played in is Louisville. I went to Louisville earlier this year. I'm not going to badmouth it here on the pod. I had a great time. But look, it's just not. I've also been to Beaver Stadium. They're two different places. They also played at Stanford, Duke, UVA, Nevada, a bunch of half-filled, sleepy stadiums. I mean, they're walking into an absolute hornet's nest here, noon or not. We do talk about the weather, though. Temperatures going to be in the 20s. How does SMU, a team from Dallas, with a team with players that are mostly from Texas, how do they fare in that? I know they're different teams. I know it's different talent level and opponents, but guys, I can't help but get this 2022 Armed Forces Bowl out of my head when Baylor just got absolutely destroyed in those freezing cold temperatures by Air Force. So, I think SMU might be able to score if the cold isn't debilitating to them, and that's why I'm probably going to wait and see what happens live with this, maybe make a live bet depending on how SMU moves the ball. But yeah, I mean, Penn State pushed Oregon around in the Big Ten championship game up front, and that's impressive because that's the number one team in the country we're talking about there. So I think they're going to be able to move SMU as well. I've seen a lot of picking the SMU's the upset specialist this weekend. Guys, I'm going to be honest. I actually think they're the least likely to pull it off. I think Penn State controls this one wire to wire. But again, it's just going to be a live play for me because I want to see how SMU is affected by bitter cold temperatures up there in Happy Valley.
Yeah, I like the weather part of the handicap, at least in regards to waiting on this game, whether you're looking to bet it. I mean, maybe to your point there, would you consider a look at the under?
If it wasn't bet so far up from open, maybe. But I personally made the mistake a couple of weeks ago when talking about the American Championship that it's gonna be pretty cold in West Point, but that shouldn't affect Tulane too much. No, it destroyed them. So I'm expecting something pretty similar for SMU here.
All right, fair enough. And to Adam's point, with Penn State's path in the college football playoff over at Bet365, the Nittany Lions had the fifth shortest odds, priced at 6-1 in the betting market to win the college football playoff. So over to the third matchup, second one on Saturday in the first round of the CFP. Number 5, Texas, -12 favorites, up from -11.5 at Bet365 against number 12, Clemson, total of 51.5. So Texas, not only do they have a stout defensive front like Indiana, you could compare strength of schedule, yes, but just saying is all I'm saying, even if you want to say apples and oranges, but they also have allowed the fewest explosive passing plays per game. So Pete Kwiatkowski's unit seemingly with a slight edge against Cade Klubnik and this Clemson passing offense. Would you agree there, Adam? Or do you expect a tighter game, at least as it relates to the point spread?
Yeah, I had Texas 24-16. Again, instant pick the day of, minutes after it was announced. I go back and forth. Texas is clearly a better team. This is a very, very good defense, as you mentioned. Maybe one of the best, if not the best, overall units in the country. And Clemson's offense, while improved, I don't think they've faced many groups talent-wise like this Texas team since that opener against Georgia, which obviously went very, very poorly for them. I think there's some interesting things, though, on the Clemson side. You have Cade Klubnik, their quarterback, who really had a good season, guys. I mean, he was someone who people were down on after last year, but he rebounded very nicely, especially after that Georgia performance, and came away with strong numbers. He goes back. He's from Austin. He grew up miles from Texas's campus, so you never know how that's going to factor in as far as how he performs. And maybe he puts together a career performance and they're right there. And then you look at Texas and again, their offense is limited. A lot of people think that they're, Quinn Ewers is the second best quarterback on the team, but Steve Sarkisian's been loyal to him, and you're going to stick with him, you would think, unless something goes horribly wrong. But they're not great at receiver. They don't have a ton of explosive plays down the field. They do have some schematic ways to attack Clemson's defense, which has been not as good. So Texas's offense not as good as it normally is under Sark. Clemson's defense not as good as it normally is. And there's some interesting crossovers in this one. Andrew Makuba, safety for Texas, was the ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year, I believe, with Clemson before he transferred after a couple of years there. So interesting crossovers in this one. But again, Texas is just a better team. And on their home field, they lose to this Clemson team, which again, sort of playing with house money, can play a little bit free. But man, that would be a brutal way for this season to end for Sark and the Longhorns.
Yeah, especially after all the negative turnover variance that struck them in the SEC championship and that overtime loss to Georgia. Brett, you in agreement with Adam that this game could be tight, maybe Clemson covering, or stay away for you like Penn State and SMU, at least in terms of the opening or closing number pregame odds?
Well, I need to see if Kelvin Banks is going to play first because he missed the SEC championship game. Quinn Ewers was sacked 6 times and pressured 17 times. Clemson has the talent on the defensive line to get home. On the other side, look, Cade Klubnik was pressured out of his mind against SMU as well, and this is a Texas team that has All-Americans at every single level. The AP All-American team's out. I can crutch on that now instead of just saying they're good here. I can point and say they literally have an All-American at every single level of the defense. I think this is a pretty wide talent gap here. I just don't see how Clemson's going to score on Texas all that much.
All right, and wrapping it up here with Ohio State and Tennessee, number 8 seed Buckeyes against the number 9 seed Vols. As it relates to the college football playoff seeding in the bracket, Ohio State a juice 7.5-point favorite at Bet365, total of 46. It's worth noting that Tennessee right now at most sports books, including Bet365, is the most popular underdog to A, cover, and B, win outright. For me, Adam, I look at the total at 46, and these defenses rank 1 and 2 in EPA per play allowed and success rate allowed nationally. Just blindly, I say under, but do you have a stronger take on the side or even the total in this game?
Yeah, I mean, the total was 46, so I had it, my math isn't great,
Correct.
So I had it at 45. I had 26-19. Again, instant pick. I was pretty close. I think it could certainly be that or lower. I think the under is a good play here. Now we might see the Ohio State offense that we've all been waiting for, as far as the opening up the passing game and going downfield, Jeremiah Smith and others. Basically, all the things they didn't do in the Michigan game. But Tennessee's really talented, and they're very good in the front seven. And Ohio State, in talking to coaches that either have been there or are there, I don't think their offensive line is going to be right until next season with some of the injuries that they have. So I think Tennessee can really get after them with Tim Banks, the coordinator, who's done a tremendous job all season, finding different ways to pressure Will Howard, who has not been a very good big game quarterback this year. He struggled against Penn State with the turnovers, obviously struggled against Michigan as well. So if I'm Tim Banks, I'm heating up Will Howard and making him make some of those big plays to kind of beat me. But Tennessee has just not played well enough away from Knoxville to give me a lot of confidence. You saw what happened at Arkansas. You saw what happened down at Georgia. Again, better against Vanderbilt, certainly after a little bit of a shaky start, but I just don't see them going into Ohio Stadium. Now, if they can get up and that environment and the boos and all the angst around Ryan Day, maybe they can pull this off, but I have Ohio State winning this one by a touchdown.
Brett Gibbons, Ryan Day stan over here, Buckeyes fan. What say you?
Well, if we're going to talk about the weather in one game, we got to talk about the weather in this game. Temperature is going to be in the 20s. But unlike Penn State, who really recruits their region well, Ohio State's roster is made up of Florida, Georgia, Texas, Southern California. So I don't think that the weather here is going to be as big an advantage for the Buckeyes as it could be if they were more regionally recruited, like back in the Urban Meyer days and whatnot. Of course, we talked about it. The Ohio State offensive line is beat up, and that Tennessee defensive line is very good. But Ohio State did have a little bit of success on the edge against Michigan, and that's where Tennessee's strength is. But inside, they couldn't get anything going, partially because they were running a second-string center and third-string guard at 2 potential first-round NFL draft picks in Michigan's defensive front. Tennessee simply doesn't have those 2 guys inside. I think it's going to be a little bit better The number one thing for me, though, is where's Ohio State mentally? And that's not something we can really quantify. Tennessee doesn't wear maize and blue. And I do think that matters quite a bit. Even though they play like Michigan, they don't have the same colors and the fights. I know that's silly. People might turn us off right now. That's why we saved it for the end. But just look at the 22 season, how Ohio State played against Michigan that year versus Georgia. I argue they should have beaten Georgia, except for a couple of tough plays that went against them at the end of the year. But look, if Ohio State plays to their potential, they're probably going to win this game pretty comfortably. Tennessee does have an All-American defensive back, Jermon McCoy. He's going to match up with one Ohio State receiver. He's 6 foot tall, about $195, maybe 200, soaking wet. Jeremiah Smith is a lot larger than him. He's going to be able to at least have the size advantage, so maybe they'll put him on Emeka Egbuka. I'm interested to see what they do there. But that, of course, comes down to Will Howard being protected if they can get going. Interesting take here. I do actually have a few leans. Number one, if you're going to take Tennessee money line, there's actually a couple of bets at Bet365 that I give you a little bit better money. Ohio State under 20.5 points. That's plus 290, better than plus 240 on the money line. Or Tennessee over 27.5 points at plus 450, because those are the two ways you're going to beat Ohio State. I don't see a 20-17. There's a very thin little area there in which you lose out if you're taking either or both of those. They're just better prices for what you're betting for. Now, if you're taking the Ohio State side, I'm betting Ohio State second half minus 4.5 at even money. Other considerations, Tennessee to win the first quarter at plus 300, win the first half at plus 220. Of course, I believe in this, and I've made money off it this year. Ohio State starts very slowly.
Yeah, you brought that up in the Indiana-Ohio State handicap. Really quickly, yes, no answer. Jeremiah Smith over under 72 and a half receiving yards at Bet365. Would you consider the over?
No.
Okay. Even with the size advantage, still.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not betting on him to go 7 for 75. Like, it could be 4 for 40. It's tough. I need to see what Ohio State's doing. I just really do. Did that Michigan game ruin them, or is it really just hey, those guys aren't wearing maize and blue, we're going to go?
All right, fair enough. He is Brett Gibbons at Road to CFB on X. Adam Rittenberg, really appreciate Adam joining us, National College Football scribe for ESPN, at ESPN Rittenberg, if you want to see his hack Twitter account. Always appreciate the time, guys. Adam, big thanks to you again.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks to everybody who watched and listened to this edition of Beat the Closing Number, presented by TheLines.com and Bet365. So long, everybody, and good luck with your college football playoff picks.